Hey everybody, Joe Pizar here, Certified Financial Planner with Washington Family Wealth here in Washington, Pennsylvania. And I wanted to get you out our September 2025 financial calendar series. Today we're going to talk about debt and liabilities. All right, and so before we get going, just a little disclaimer. As I think it goes without saying with all these videos, they are my opinion and my opinion only, and should be taken with a grain of salt. Any advice you get, you should check with your tax, investment, legal counselors before executing on any of that, and just thought it'd be fair to put that in there as well as in the disclaimer later on. So when we talk about debt, let's start out with some of our national numbers and nationally where are we at. So the slide you see on the screen now shows our current consumer debt load. We're approaching $17 trillion in outstanding dollars lent. You can see the areas that we lend in, and they stayed fairly consistent with the exception of a couple of areas. So the percentage of student loans taken out, those have increased dramatically, over 400% since 2008. We also see an increase in credit cards and some other types of debt. So the other thing that we will see here on this next slide is delinquency by the type. So if you remember back to COVID times during the 2020 era, we did have a delay in student loan payments. So as those payments have started back up, we see a big uptick in delinquency in that student loan arena as people get used to paying student loan types. But one thing I would stress everybody to look at when we look at, our national debt levels, which is not necessarily indicative of where you are personally at, but when we look at debt levels and delinquency rates in particular, those delinquency rates can kind of be a canary in the coal mine with what the U.S. consumer is feeling. So keep an eye on those delinquency rates as we navigate these waters to see kind of what pressures are the American consumers having, and are those delinquencies getting higher than they need to be. So overall, when we look at our national situation, we as consumers have taken on more debt since 2008, I guess you could use as a high or a low watermark, if you will, and paired with higher than normal inflation and higher than normal interest rates. So let's say you took out a loan during COVID at 10%. If it's a revolving line, unsecured debt could be up to 25, 28, 30% now. So definitely something to be considerate about, like situationally, where do we sit, and how much debt do people have outstanding? What are those current delinquency rates? And then what are we looking at from a national standpoint? What's the current environment? So, right, if we were to try to refinance debt now, interest rates are higher, so it might be more difficult to refinance at a lower interest rate. So when we look at people's debt, what is the main thing that lenders or other folks look at to determine whether or not our debt rate is healthy or not? And normally what we use is what's called debt to income ratio, or your DTI ratio. And what is that? That is what percentage of our monthly income goes to servicing debt, principal and interest payments primarily, hopefully not penalties or other types of things. So how do we do that? We take the dollar amount that we pay out in monthly loan payments, and then into that we divide your take-home pay, and that percentage is your debt-to-income ratio. And usually if you're under 36%, so less than 36% of your take-home pay goes to service debt, that's usually a pretty good average. When we start to see concern is 36 to 42% or higher, that's when a lender is going to get concerned over whether or not you'd be able to shoulder this additional loan burden and other things. So that's just one way that we use to check, are my loans getting to be too burdensome on my financial situation? And that is just a rule. Certainly for some people, a 25% DTI could be uncomfortable. For some others, maybe even a 50% is comfortable to them. So it just depends on your monthly budget, what all you're using to track that, and all that kind of stuff. So how do we fix this situation if our DTI is a little higher, or even if it's lower and we just feel a little uncomfortable with the amount of debt we're carrying, how do we pay down debt more adequately? So first things first, we want to gather up our information. So let's get all of those debt numbers. So the outstanding balance, the interest rate, if it has a term, right, like a mortgage normally has a term on it, that'd be good information. Some things are revolving, so they don't have an end date, so to speak. So knowing whether it's a revolving line or a termed loan would be helpful. And so what we want to do after we gather up all that data is we want to review the options. So what is the most efficient way for us to deal with this debt? One, can we even deal with this debt right now? So if payments have gotten so high that we can't function normally, we're going to have to look at some other options. But let's assume that we're able to pay our debts. We just want to do it in a more efficient way possible. One is amortization. So the best case scenario is we pay a little bit more on that debt to get it paid off sooner than later. When you get a fresh mortgage, this is always a good idea to do this. You run an amortization schedule to see what would one extra payment per year save us over the course of that loan, and you'd be surprised with how much you'd save over a 30-year loan. So that's a good case. We have extra money. We're trying to pay off our debts early. What's the most efficient way to pay them off? The other way is we run a regular payoff schedule, and we run it different ways where we say, is it better to pay off this one with the highest interest rate, or is it better to pay off this one with the lowest balance? And then kind of pancake those onto each other. Dave Ramsey made this method very famous. He recommends this in a lot of his writings, but you're taking, once you get one debt paid off, you're taking that payment, you're pancaking it onto the next one to eliminate the debt as fast as possible. So that's your next kind of option. Next option we would look at is refinancing. So I took a loan out in the early 2000s or in the 2000s during COVID. Those interest rates went from 10 to now 25%. I don't want to pay that on a revolving loan. Do I take that balance of that card to another place? Well, there are a couple things to think about. One, a lot of places will charge you a transfer percentage. So a percentage of that outstanding loan balance will get charged to you to move it. Two, the rates are not always set in stone. So it's not always a fixed rate for an extended period of time. Sometimes it's temporary. Sometimes it's an introductory rate. So you're only going to have that lower rate for a certain time. A lot of times when people say, well, I'm going to move my credit card to a 0% and then I'm going to pay it off and then it'll be gone. Well, that all works if we follow through with that. If the charge to move the balance isn't too large, etc. So can be a viable option with refinancing or simply just going to a lower percentage on a loan. But with interest rates, being higher, it's a little bit harder. As we see interest rates change, we might be able to see a more normalized interest rate environment where refinancing could be an option, but another option to look at for sure. The last couple options we want to go over briefly are payoff. So we just pay the debt off if we had assets. A lot of times, and I certainly appreciate this, folks do not want to look at dipping into retirement accounts or other assets to pay off debt. But if you're in a situation where the debt has grown to where you can't keep up on it, I would certainly look at all available options, even if that is using a retirement account in some way, shape, or form, a loan, a distribution, etc. And last couple options, charge-offs. And I know these aren't fun to talk about, but you can charge a card off. You would be hit with income for the amount that you charged off, or the credit card company would write off. And then you can certainly always look at a bankruptcy. There are attorneys that are qualified in talking about this that I would highly recommend. If you are in that situation where you think you could qualify for a bankruptcy, talk to a qualified legal professional that can walk you through the process, let you know a value of your rights as a consumer, and make sure that you're not making an ill-informed decision. So like we talked about, pay it down normally, try to amortize it if possible, great. If you need to restructure or refinance, you could look at paying it off with some other means, charging an account off, or even potential bankruptcy. So there's a lot of opportunities to, maneuver around debt that gets unadvantageous. But, to be clear, debt isn't necessarily a bad thing if used appropriately. We just want to make sure we're using debt as appropriately as possible. In closing, I wanted to go through some of the interesting facts I found out while researching this little video. So right now, consumers 18 to 29, they are lending less, which is, I guess, good. They're taking out less in loans than previous generations. However, their delinquency rates are higher. They're not paying it back at a reasonable of rate. Debt from 40 to 49, those consumers own a majority of the debt in the system right now. So of that 17 trillion out there, my age demographic, the 40 somethings are holding it down with all those mortgages, student loans, and everything else they got laying around out there. And then lastly, and this was a little concerning, but our 70 plus demographic, they are growing their debt load the quickest, which we don't normally see that. People in that stage are spending resources, not necessarily taking debt out. So there were some interesting things that I saw pop up. But remember that managing debt and your liabilities is part of your financial plan and part of our job to help you with that. So make sure you're coming in for your review meetings, or if you have any questions, you reach out to us here at Washington Family Wealth. My name is Joe Pizar. I'm a certified financial planner here with Washington Family Wealth here in Washington, Pennsylvania, and certainly appreciate your time here. Take care and reach out to us with any questions you have. Bye.